We're going to give a shout and spend some time discussing a couple teams that tend to fly under the radar. One in particular is having a hard time flying under the radar because they're playing so damn well, and that's the Sacramento Kings.
They are extremely fun.
Very fun group to watch.
Extremely fun. They are third in offense, and it feels sometimes like they should be first in offense when you look at some of the box scores. It seems like they're putting 130, 140 up a night. That beam is
the beam is
lit up.
It's interesting. You said they're third in offense. I actually basically say they're first because Denver's at 117.5 per 100. Boston's at 117.4. They're at 117.3. And then there's a pretty significant drop-off to fourth place. Defensively, still bad, 24th. But they're 24-18. They won last night on the road versus Spurs. They're now in fourth place. They're a game back in the loss column of the Pels, and they're 3 games up in the loss column of the Dallas Mavericks. Very good chance that this team has home court advantage in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just amazing for the sport.
It's amazing for their fan base.
Yeah.
I tweeted this out. If they have one of the best fan bases in the NBA. This is a team that hasn't been in the playoffs since 2006. Like, their fans deserve this.
Can we talk about how good Sabonis is?
I do want to talk about Sabonis. I actually want to spend a lot of time on Sabonis. He's having a remarkable season. I want one little anecdote. Shout out to my guy, Matt Williams at ESPN, who sends me and a bunch of ESPN employees a wonderful stat recap newsletter type thing every morning at about 3 a.m. I have my morning coffee. I read it. It's my highlight of my morning. This is a great stat, though. The top 3 teams right now in the Western Conference, the Denver Nuggets, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the New Orleans Pelicans, have 0 combined NBA Finals appearances. And if you include the Kings, the top 4 in the Western Conference right now have 1 Finals appearance in their histories. And the 1 Finals appearance was Rochester in 1951. Like,
this is what's great. This is
so good for the sport.
It's so good for the league.
Yeah, really is.
It's so unpredictable. I mean, we know that everyone's close, so let's check back in a month. But it's so unpredictable. But let's get to our boy.
All right. So Sabonis last night, 18, 18, and 8. He's got 7 games this season with 15 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 assists, at least those numbers. So he passed Jokic last night for the most in the NBA. He's got 20 straight double-doubles, the most by a Kings player since Jerry Lucas in 1968. For the season, he's averaging a little under 19 points, 12.6 rebounds, 7.1 assists, 61% from the field. It's just remarkable how good he is. And we all knew how good he was. This is a guy who made an All-NBA team. He made 2 All-Star appearances in Indiana. I was thinking about the difference, Tommy, the difference between last year. He only played in 15 games. They were 5-10. The difference between last year and this year with this team and how they're using him as a centerpiece. And the big thing, obviously, they hired Mike Brown, who's done a great job, known as a defensive coach. And they're not very good defensively, but their offense is awesome. But what they did in the offseason in adding shooting around him and De'Aaron Fox, this can't be overstated enough. Keegan Murray, 40% from 3 on 5 attempts. Kevin Huerter having a career year, 42% on 7 attempts. They also added Malik Monk, who shot 39% last year in LA, 40% the previous season in Charlotte. He's only at 32%. But again, another shooter, Harrison Barnes at 37%. He was 39% last year. He's shooting the shit out of the ball right now, 64% from 3 over the last 4 games. And so what that shooting does, number one, it allows Sabonis to be a playmaker, and it also allows De'Aaron Fox to drive the basketball. There is so much more spacing when they have their starting unit on the court.
Yeah, and just how fast they play. You're speaking of playmaking, are you surprised at all Sabonis has always been a great rebounder. Are you surprised at all at some of the playmaking this year? Because it does feel, not to make the comps or whatever, but there are Joker elements to his game.
Dude, there are Joker elements to his game.
Like the way he plays, there's not really anyone else.
This is not a disrespect to Sabonis, but it is Jokic light. He's not a poor man's Jokic because he's fucking awesome.
No, and he's gonna be on the All NBA team with him. But it's like they play sort of similarly in a way, and it's kind of like until you watch him play, you don't really get it.
So he's averaging a career high in assists, 7.1 assists. I'm not surprised by the playmaking because he did average 6.7 assists in his second All-Star season in Indy. It's interesting how we judge young players, and Sabonis, they played him as a 4 in OKC his rookie year. They had him basically as a stretch 4. He shot a lot of threes. Not really his game. He's a masher in the post, and he's a hub out of that delay action. So by delay action, for the listener, it's just a 5-out offense. He's typically either at the top of the key or on the left wing. And out of that action, there's a lot of passing. So he hits a lot of cutters, back cuts, and then his dribble handoff game is phenomenal, especially on that left side with Herter coming to his right. And so he gets a lot of assists out of dribble handoffs. And he also gets assists out of the post when he gets doubled. But that jump, that in terms of playmaking, that happened a long time ago. Like he averaged, I think, a little under 3 assists in his third year. That jumped up to 5 assists a game, and he's been basically at 5 or more
Yeah.
since his 4th year in the NBA.
I looked up, you were mentioning some of the different guys that they've added this offseason. They're the only team in the league right now. They have 6 different guys who've scored 30 points this year. And I know Terrence Davis has had a couple games where he's gone off and things like that. How much of this at this point, and we were talking about the fans earlier and just the beam and everything, the energy around this, how much of this at this point is just like, we've talked a bunch on the show about vibes and how how vibes can basically take a team that has talent and bring them to the next level. They seem like they're sort of feeling that right now. I mean, a couple nights ago when Harrison Barnes went off, it just feels like every night there's a baseline you're going to get from Fox, there's a baseline you're going to get from Sabonis, but they have different guys who are sort of stepping up, and that might just be because the energy around the organization.
I always go back to fit, though, Tommy. I always go back to fit. And this is where I think drafting Keegan Murray. By the way, the Hawks basically gave away Herter because they didn't want to be a tax team. So they basically gave away his contract to the Kings. So I think it's more fit. And I will go back to De'Aaron Fox. He's having his most efficient season in his career. He's a tad under 60% true shooting. All of his shooting numbers are great. And a really interesting stat, he's top 10 in efficiency in the NBA on drives among players with 200-plus plays driving the basketball, and just outside the top 10 in total drives. So the shooting has opened things up for him. It's opened things up for Sabonis. And that shooting complements Fox. That shooting complements Sabonis. And as we said at the outset, just an incredibly fun team to watch. Now, I brought up the defense. And I went through basically their lineup data. And their starting unit, by far, the most 5-man lineup minutes on their team. They've got 119 offensive rating. Would be league best. They've got a 110.5 defensive rating. That's essentially tied with Philly would be the 4th best defense in the league. So that group, by and large, is really good.
I didn't realize they were that good.
I got more.
Interesting.
You sub Davion Mitchell for De'Aaron Fox. That 5-man lineup, even better. That's their second most used lineup. 123.5 insane offensive rating, down to 108.2 defensive, which basically puts them as a top 2 or 3 defense. Their third most used lineup, you sub Monk for Keegan Murray. Their offense skyrockets to 128. Their defense bottoms out at 118, but still a 10.0 net rating. It's interesting, though. Their next 3 most used lineups all have Sabonis in them, and those lineups are a negative 4.1 rating, a negative 23.3 rating, and a negative 8.1 rating. The reason I bring this up is when we talk about playoffs, figuring out rotations. So their starting 5 is great. Davion Mitchell subbing for Fox is great. Malik Monk gives you a lot of offense. But how do you shore up the defense around Sabonis when those guys aren't in the game?
Yeah.
You shorten the rotation. Like that's the question. So we're not in a position right now to make playoff predictions, but the offense is so good with the right group around Sabonis. The defense is really freaking good. How do you win the marginal minutes?
It feels a little modern, current Warriors-esque. in terms of the drop
Yeah,
off.
yeah, that's good.
Where there's like a
It is interesting though because it like one guy. I bring up Sabonis just because he's a 5, and typically 5s are the defensive angers. His on court defensive rating would essentially be the 22nd best defense in the league. They're 24th overall, so they're clearly better defensively with him on the court overall. But you've got to figure out the right lineups around him because in a playoff series, he's going to play 35 to 40 minutes a game.
I was going to ask with the defense how much of it was just a size thing. Would you sacrifice that if you have Harrison, if your starting front court is Harrison, Keegan, and Sabonis, against certain teams, you're gonna get beat down low just from like a natural physicality standpoint.
That's where you would go to sort of matchups in playoffs and how teams play. Maybe against the Pelicans, you're worried about paint points.
Yeah.
And maybe you have to go a little bigger at times. Which brings me to our second thing of the week, the Oklahoma City Thunder. The full episode of The Old Man and the Three Things is available exclusively on Amazon Music.